I think Spain looks really, really good. With the Trionda, we now have 4 panels on the ball. It's the fewest ever on a World Cup ball. In fact, this ball is actually a tiny bit more rough than its predecessors. We might actually be able to see some enhanced spin and enhanced Magnus effect where we can get a little bit more lift on the ball, like David Beckham did in the late 90s and do that famous bend it like Beckham kick, the Nike flight ball that was used in the Premier League. Start reducing the panel number, you run the risk of the ball becoming too smooth. And this was a problem with Javelani in 2010. When it went to 8 panels, the ball was surface textured, but not enough. With the Trionda, we now have 4 panels on the ball. It's the fewest ever on a World Cup ball. And to make up for the possible smoothness of the ball, to add some roughness, there are 3 deep grooves in the panels. The seam width and seam depth is much more than we've seen in something like Javelani. And the total seam length is about 2.5 meters. So to get the panel number down and to keep the roughness up, these added features, including even some micro textures that are on here to represent the 3 countries, give the ball an overall roughness. In fact, this ball is actually a tiny bit more rough than its predecessors. And what that means is the high speed drag coefficient, as we call it, is a tiny bit larger than its predecessors. So if it were kicked without spin, it might go a few meters short of, say, a 50-meter kick. But with the ball spinning, the ability for the boot to get into the grooves and cause some backspin, we might actually be able to see some enhanced spin and enhanced Magnus effect where we can get a little bit more lift on the ball. But overall, it's a very good, very good football. I think that's a little less because of the changes in the ball and much more due to the analytics that have entered into the sport of football. So even 20 years ago, the analytic data that existed for soccer, as it's called in the US, or football around the world, was nothing like in other sports like baseball, for example. So when players would line up like David Beckham did in the late 90s and do that famous bend it like Beckham kick, there was not a lot of analytic data to support where the wall should be standing, what type of kick he's likely to do. And he would kind of read the players that were set up and, Roberto Carlos, they would see what kind of players were on the pitch and then design the kick from there. Now with analytics, there's so much more data and information about how teams tend to defend kicks, how teams tend to actually execute free kicks. These types of kicks aren't seen as much anymore. And I really think it's due to the analytic influence of the data in the sport. So I did my PhD work in condensed matter physics, very mathematical work, very theoretical work. And I started teaching at a small liberal arts college here in the United States. It was in Virginia at the time, and had students that were interested in projects in sports. And we were trying to find projects that undergraduate students could do. So we were not looking for something too mathematical, too theoretical, and they really liked the sports projects. So I started getting involved in Tour de France modeling. I started getting involved in tennis physics. And then, of course, the soccer physics came along in about 2005, 2006. So the students that I've had in the past really pushed me into this. And then I've got a great collaboration with some colleagues in England and a really nice collaboration with colleagues in Japan. They, at the University of Tsukuba, supply me with wind tunnel data for these balls. And I can do all the data analysis, the physics modeling, and all of that kind of work with the data that they supply. So it's been a fantastic past 20 years of doing sports physics with football. So the wetness of the pitch, or if you have any kind of rain, there's a crossover that happens. So when it first starts to get damp and moist, the play can actually be a little bit faster as the ball skips a little bit more on the pitch. If the rain is not taken away, if the irrigation system is not removing the water very quickly, you can start getting the game to slow down because the pitch gets waterlogged. The players are moving a lot slower on the slower, spongier turf. But the ball with those grooves that are in here, these three grooves in the panel, does allow for the player's boot to grip it a little bit more. This ball, and I actually have one over my shoulder here, the yellow ball that's back there is the Nike Flight ball that was used in the Premier League up until this past season. That ball has the groove structure as well. So players who've used the Nike Flight ball are likely to have some familiarity with this Trionda ball. The ball that was used this past year, the Orbita ball, that's the one sitting next to the yellow ball. That ball was used in the Premier League this past year and doesn't have these types of grooves. So I think if players have used the Nike Flight ball, they'll be used to these type of deep groove structures on the panels. That's a ball they'll be familiar with. So FIFA requires that these matches be played on natural grass. So in the colder climates, there are about 10 stadia that will have the Kentucky bluegrass, this type of grass that's good in the colder climates. And the controlled climates, even in stadia where you'd expect summer to be very hot, they have a dome so they can control the climate better. In the stadia where you've got open stadia that don't have a dome structure, say in Miami, it's going to be very hot there. So they use what's called Bermuda grass. And the engineering that's been taking place on the grasses is started in 2021. So even before the Qatar World Cup, the engineers have been working to get these grasses ready. They have to be rolled out onto the existing turf or the pitches that were there. And the roots don't go down into the concrete. They have to turn sideways. So last year, there were some complaints that this turf was a little bit spongier. But so far, early indications are that the turf is behaving well at the start of the World Cup. And the ball should be rolling and behaving the same on the bounce at the two different types of grasses. Now, whenever you get to the stadia in Mexico, like in Mexico City, there the air density is 80% of what it is at sea level. So that reduces the drag on this ball, which means the ball is going to fly faster at that higher elevation. It also means that when it's spinning, there's going to be less Magnus force, so it doesn't curve as well whenever you're at higher elevation. So faster balls, less curves, and the players, of course, are going to have to deal with that elevation as well whenever they're breathing. So in 2022 with Qatar, the Al Rila ball put the IMU in the center of the ball and then used the strings to attach it to the outer shell of the ball on the interior. The Trionda embeds the inertial measurement unit in one of the panels, and then you have counterbalancing masses on the other four panels. It's not a perfect smearing of the mass to keep the distribution the same from all orientations, but it's only a couple of grams. It's a small change to the mass of the ball on one side, and then you start counterbalancing on the other panels. So I don't think it's going to play a huge role in the motion of the ball or whatever the players perceive its motion. Well, I'm certainly supporting my home country, the U.S. I've got colleagues in England and Japan. I've got colleagues around the world, so I root for their clubs as well. If I had to pick a team, I think Spain looks really, really good. But I'm certainly going to be pulling for my U.S. team.